Richard Williams was a billionaire in Lagos, owner of oil wells, sprawling estates, and a mansion in Ikoyi guarded like a fortress. From the outside, his life looked untouchable. Fleets of cars, political connections, and a daughter, Emily, in one of the best international schools on Victoria Island. Yet behind that power was a man haunted by an emptiness money had never filled. He had grown up under strict, loveless parents who believed success was all that mattered, and he carried that same coldness into his own parenting. But just across the same city, under the blistering sun and chaos of Lagos traffic, lived David, a 12-year-old boy with torn slippers and a sack of recyclables slung over his bony shoulder. His backstory was one of quiet tragedy. His father had died of a sickness the family couldn't afford to treat, and his mother struggled as a roadside food seller. David had no classroom, no teachers, no luxury, only the scraps of textbooks he rescued from trash heaps. Yet, unlike most children his age, he carried himself with a quiet fire, teaching himself mathematics late at night under streetlights while the city roared on. Richard's daughter Emily was caught between those two worlds. Unlike her father, she was tender-hearted and curious, traits she inherited from the mother she lost at a young age. Though she lived in privilege, Emily longed for simple joy, something her father's wealth could never give. And then one ordinary afternoon at the school gate, those worlds collided. Richard pulled up in his black Range Rover, expecting to see Emily waiting for her driver. Instead, his eyes locked on a scene that froze him. Emily sitting on the dusty ground smiling for the first time in months, beside David, the trash-picking boy. With nothing but stones and bottle caps, David was teaching her mathematics, something expensive tutors had failed to do. In that fleeting moment, Richard saw not just his daughter learning, but a mirror of everything he had ignored in life: humility, wisdom, and love in the most unexpected place. That encounter would test his pride, challenge his beliefs, and change his destiny. But why would a billionaire's daughter find comfort in the lessons of a boy who lived off the streets? What hidden strength did David carry that even money couldn't buy? And what would Richard do when he discovered that the boy teaching his daughter was actually teaching him the greatest lesson of all? Sit back, grab your popcorn, and let's dive into this interesting story. The afternoon sun in Victoria Island burned hot against the asphalt. School was just closing at one of Lagos's most prestigious international academies. SUVs and sedans lined up outside the gates, chauffeurs in dark suits waiting to collect the children. The air smelled faintly of exhaust fumes mixed with the sweet aroma of roasted corn sold by a woman at the roadside. Inside a black Range Rover with tinted windows, Richard Williams adjusted his gold wristwatch impatiently. He was a man who lived on schedules, his life measured in boardroom meetings and business calls. Today, he had cleared a space in his calendar, not for leisure but to personally pick up his daughter, Emily. His assistants often handled such things, but Richard had been troubled. Despite paying top tutors, Emily still struggled with mathematics. He planned to have a stern word with her about discipline, but as his vehicle inched closer to the school gate, a strange sight pulled him upright. He saw his daughter not in her neat uniformed line with her classmates, but seated on the ground outside the gate. Beside her sat a boy. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. His shirt was faded and torn, his slippers nearly worn out. A sack full of plastic bottles and empty cans leaned against his side. He used stones and bottle caps to sketch numbers into the dusty ground. Emily, his daughter, leaned forward eagerly, clapping her hands as if the lesson was a game. Richard blinked hard. His daughter, the child of a billionaire, educated in the most expensive school money could buy, was learning mathematics from a boy who scavenged through trash. For a moment, anger flared in him. What nonsense was this? But then he caught something that froze his words before they reached his lips. Emily was smiling. Not the forced, polite smile she gave her tutors, but a genuine childlike grin that lit up her whole face. It was a smile Richard hadn't seen in years. Inside the car, his chest tightened. His world of wealth and order suddenly felt powerless. Emily's laughter rang out, snapping him further. "Daddy, look," she shouted, noticing the car. She scrambled up and tugged at his arm as soon as the chauffeur opened the door. David showed me division with stones. I get it now. I really understand. Richard turned to the boy. David's hands were dusty, but the numbers in the sand were neat and precise. The boy's eyes met his briefly. Sharp, intelligent eyes, full of a quiet dignity that no poverty could erase. Richard said nothing. His throat felt dry. For the first time in years, the man who commanded boardrooms and politicians alike was struck silent by a barefoot child with a sack of trash. That evening, the streets of Victoria Island were alive with noise, the blaring of car horns, hawkers weaving through traffic shouting, "Pure water, gala, cold minerals." But inside Richard Williams' mansion in Ikoyi, silence reigned. The mansion was vast, built with marble floors and chandeliers that sparkled under warm lighting. Security guards stood at the gate. House staff moved quietly in the background, yet the air felt empty. Richard sat alone in the living room, his jacket thrown across the armrest, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table before him. His mind replayed the image of Emily, his daughter, sitting happily in the dust, laughing with a boy who picked bottles from trash bins. The sight gnawed at him. Richard prided himself on control over his business empire, over politics, even over how people perceived him. Yet today, control had slipped away in the most unexpected way. He picked up Emily's school notebook lying on the sofa. Neatly written in chalk across one page were sums and divisions, far clearer than the messy scrawls she usually made. It wasn't her handwriting. It was David's. Richard stared at the numbers for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. He thought of the tutors he had hired, experts from abroad, charging fees that could pay a man's salary for months. None of them had managed to get through to Emily, yet a boy from the streets had done it in minutes using stones and bottle caps. Richard's mind drifted back to his own childhood. He had grown up in a wealthy but loveless home. His father, a stern businessman, believed children needed discipline, not affection. His mother was distant, preoccupied with social appearances. Richard had been taught that success was measured by money, not happiness. He had carried those lessons into adulthood and into his parenting. He sighed heavily. Was history repeating itself? Was he failing Emily the same way his parents had failed him? The sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. Emily padded into the room, still in her school uniform, her shoes off, holding her stuffed teddy bear. She smiled sleepily at him. "Daddy, David is so smart. He made me understand math. Can he come again?" Richard felt his chest tighten. He wanted to dismiss it, to brush it off as childish nonsense. But the light in Emily's eyes stopped him. It was a light he hadn't seen in years. His throat burned. For the first time in decades, a tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, ashamed of his own weakness. He whispered to himself, almost trembling, "Why did it take a boy with nothing to give my daughter everything she needed?" The whiskey sat untouched. Richard leaned back on the sofa, lost in thought, realizing that money had failed him in the one place it mattered most, his daughter's heart. The next afternoon, the school gates on Victoria Island buzzed with the usual rhythm. Parents' cars lined the roadside, drivers argued with security about parking, and hawkers squeezed between vehicles shouting, "Gala, cold pure water, soft drinks." The noise of Lagos traffic never stopped, but Richard Williams barely noticed any of it. He sat in his black Range Rover again, eyes scanning the street. He wasn't here just to pick Emily today. He was here for David. And there he was. The boy was crouched near the drainage, rummaging through a pile of discarded plastic bottles. His sack, patched in 3 places, sagged heavily over his small shoulders. He worked quickly, his thin hands moving with practiced efficiency. To passers-by, he was invisible, just another street child. But to Richard, his presence filled the street. Richard's jaw tightened. He stepped out of the car. Immediately, his bodyguards moved to follow, but with a wave of his hand, he ordered them to stay back. For For the first time in years, the billionaire wanted no shield between himself and the truth he was chasing. David noticed him and froze. His eyes widened in alarm. Children like him were used to being shouted at, chased away, or beaten for trespassing. He clutched his sack tightly, ready to run. Richard raised a hand, his voice calmer than he expected. "Wait, I'm not here to harm you." David hesitated. His bare feet shifted uneasily on the hot pavement. His eyes, sharp and cautious, studied the tall man in a tailored suit. "You're David, aren't you?" Richard asked. The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." His voice was respectful but guarded. At that moment, Emily ran out of the school gate. "Daddy!" she called, dashing toward them. She hugged David first before holding her father's hand. "David's been helping me with math again. He's the best teacher I've ever had." Richard looked down at his daughter, then at the boy. David's face flushed, embarrassed but proud. "Who taught you all this?" Richard asked, his tone heavy with curiosity. David looked away, kicking the ground lightly. "No one, sir, I read the old books I find in the trash. Sometimes people throw away good ones. I keep them, and I study at night by the streetlights." Richard's chest tightened. In his world, knowledge was bought at the best schools and universities abroad. But here was a boy who had carved wisdom out of garbage. Emily tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can David come home with us today? Please?" For a long moment, Richard didn't answer. He was staring at David, really seeing him now. Not a ragged boy with a sack, but a child with the spark of something rare. The next day, the black Range Rover pulled into Ikoyi, its tinted windows reflecting the leafy streets lined with mansions and luxury cars. Security guards at Richard Williams' estate opened the massive gates, saluting as the vehicle rolled in. Inside the car, David sat nervously beside Emily, clutching his patched sack like a lifeline. His bare feet rubbed against the leather car mat, leaving faint dust marks. When the car stopped, David's eyes widened. Before him rose a white, marble-faced mansion with tall pillars, fountains gushing at the entrance, and gardeners trimming hedges with precision. He froze at the door, afraid to step on the polished floors. He had never seen such wealth up close, except on television when peeking through electronics shop windows. Emily, sensing his hesitation, grabbed his hand. "Come, David, don't worry. This is our home." Her voice was filled with warmth, as though she had brought a friend to a safe place. Richard, standing just behind them, observed carefully. He noticed David's wide eyes, his slow steps, his awe. For the first time, Richard felt shame. Shame at the abundance surrounding him, at the wastefulness he had grown used to. Inside, the mansion gleamed. A long dining table sat unused, chandeliers sparkled above, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen. David's eyes darted everywhere, but what caught him most was the sheer excess. Trays of untouched fruit, bowls of bread left cold, and plates being cleared by staff though barely eaten. He whispered, almost to himself, "So much food. Wasted." The words hit Richard like a blow. He had never noticed. He had never cared. Emily pulled David to the study room, a large space filled with shelves of imported books. David stopped again, staring. His fingers traced the spines of titles he had only heard of but never touched. "You have all these books?" he asked in disbelief. Richard, watching silently from the doorway, saw the boy's hunger for knowledge more clearly than ever. David sat with Emily at the mahogany study table. Emily spread out her homework eagerly, and David began explaining, using pencils and papers this time instead of stones. His voice grew steadier, more confident. His eyes lit up with every sum, every problem solved. Emily's laughter rang out again, bright and full. Richard leaned against the doorway, arms folded. But something inside him was unraveling. For years he had believed power was money, that intelligence was bought with tutors and schools. Yet here was a barefoot boy from the streets teaching with more patience, creativity, and effectiveness than anyone money could hire. Richard's throat tightened. His eyes burned. And then quietly, he walked in, lowering himself to one knee beside the boy. David froze, unsure. Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice trembling. "David, you've given me something no amount of money could ever buy. You gave me my daughter's smile back." David's lips parted, shocked. He had never heard a man of such power speak with such humility. Emily looked between them, her small hands clasping theirs together. In that moment, 3 lives intertwined: wealth, innocence, and poverty, creating a bond that would change everything. Weeks later, the grand auditorium of the University of Lagos buzzed with anticipation. Rows of seats were filled with students, lecturers, journalists, and city dignitaries. Flashing cameras lined the front, reporters whispering about why one of Nigeria's most powerful billionaires had suddenly called a press event focused not on oil, not on real estate, but on education. At the center stage stood a long banner that read, "The David Williams Foundation for Underprivileged Children." The spotlight shifted as Richard Williams, dressed in a cream-colored agbada with gold embroidery, walked up to the podium. His presence commanded silence, but his voice carried a different tone from the man Lagos once knew, no longer cold, no longer distant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "for years I thought wealth was measured by cars, mansions, and titles. But I was wrong. True wealth is measured by the lives we touch." He paused, scanning the audience. His eyes found David, seated in the front row beside his mother, who wore a simple wrapper and head tie. Tears glistened in her eyes as she held her son's hand tightly. Emily sat on David's other side, clapping proudly for her friend. Richard continued, "I once believed money could buy knowledge, happiness, even love. But one day, outside the gates of my daughter's school, I saw something that changed me forever. I saw a boy with no shoes carrying a sack of trash, teaching my daughter mathematics in a way the best tutors could not. That boy's name is David." The crowd gasped, murmurs spreading across the hall. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked nonstop. Richard raised a hand. "Today, in his honor, I am launching a scholarship fund that will ensure children like him, children who hunger for knowledge but are denied by poverty, will never have to search in garbage bins for books again. This is not charity. This is justice, for brilliance can rise from anywhere, even the streets." Applause thundered through the hall. Some stood to their feet, cheering. Richard stepped down from the podium and walked straight to David. Ignoring the flashing cameras, he bent low and embraced the boy tightly, his voice breaking into David's ear. "You didn't just teach my daughter. You taught me how to live." David's small frame trembled. His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, whispering back, "Thank you, sir. But I only shared what I learned." The auditorium roared with applause again, but Richard barely heard it. For him, the real victory wasn't the cameras or the crowd. It was the boy in his arms and the smile on his daughter's face.